The Devil's Cartographer. They said the map smelled like thunder. Not the easy kind, the summer rattle over vineyards that teaches old men to count to 7. No, the coppery promise of a storm that intends to revise a coastline. When Eileen Captain slid the tube across the cafe table in Lisbon's Alfama, the brass met wood with a small, purposeful knock, and the Fado singer in the corner broke a lyric on the wrong breath as if she'd heard history clear its throat. Before knives, before sums, Eileen said, her bracelets chiming like a low tide on a tin shore. Open it. Dr. Elias Naroun did not open things because thieves told him to. He opened them because he had spent a life learning which doors asked to be honest. He unfastened the tube's latch, simple, tilted it, careful, and let the rolled skin slide into his left palm while his right hovered like a benediction. Sarnai Bat Erden watched their corner of the room with a ranger's idleness, which is to say, with precision and a profound refusal to blink often enough to reassure anyone. She sat with her back to a wall painted the color of old approvals and kept a hand on the pelican case by her boot. Outside, the Tagus breathed like a dragon that had learned diplomacy. It smells like rain on flint, Elias murmured. Thunder, Eileen corrected, pleased. And something else. I thought of you because you've got a nose full of ancient weather. And you, Sarnai said dryly, because you've got a nose for trouble. Trouble is a wine, Eileen said. I taste, you two decide whether to drink. Elias unrolled the map. It was not parchment, not vellum. The surface held a grain like cured skin and a sheen like revered mica, the color of clouds over basalt. Black lines traced coasts with a hand that had never apologized for being precise. Small red sigils marked bays and teats of headland and the mouths of 2 drowned rivers. In the lower left, a compass rose that refused to be a flower. Its petals were arrows and its arrows had little hooks. In the upper right, script, not Latin, not Arabic, not any tongue that admitted to a nation. The letters stroked and forked like soundings in a deep channel. And the coastlines. He knew Portugal from above as lovers know scars by fingertip. The map showed her younger, ribs showing through the sand. Sandbars where there were now ferry routes. A whole salt lagoon where factories now sulked. The Tagus mouth wider, more honest about its sea. Farther out, an island rode the page where there should be none. No chart he had ever trusted had left a dot there. Its shape was wrong in a way that made him think of perfectly healed breaks. He leaned closer. The ink, if ink had no age. It sat on the surface like a decree. He put his nose close enough to embarrass himself. Thunder, yes. A sweet behind it, not incense, not flowers. The scent of pitch boats were under their skins, the stuff that seals them against regret. And a faint, ruthless bitterness like burnt orange peel. Where did you get this? He asked without removing his eyes. Out of a man, Eileen said, then smiled to insult the dramatics of her own line. He had it inked under his skin. Left forearm. Someone did it to him with care and cruelty 30 years ago. He said he'd been branded into a family he never chose. And you took his arm, Sarnai said evenly. I took his trust, Eileen said. He's alive, half-drunk, in a room with 2 locks and an aunt watching. You want it out. I want honest friends. The arm is where it belongs. But the brand? She pointed to one of the red sigils stamped on the impossible island. Then she rolled her sleeve back and showed them her own forearm. The mark was there, a little darker than a healed burn should be, 2 hooked crescents back to back, forming a vertical eye whose pupil was a pricked hole where needle had met nerve. The skin around it carried a faint, stubborn gloss. Elias looked from the map to her arm and back. You do not collect accidents. I don't, Eileen agreed. But accidents have a habit of collecting me. I thought it was an old smuggler's mark, bragging, I belong, I know. 3 ports have variations. But then I saw this and the island and remembered a story Nacy used to tell when we were 6. The Devil's Cartographer. Delightful, Sarnai said, meaning the opposite. The man who marked the world before God was done with it, Eileen said. He walked the emptiness where the sea hadn't learned to drown yet, took soundings with a string made of future hair. Every point he named belonged to him for 100 years. Every map he drew burned to ash unless you starved it with salt. Elias tasted the bitterness again and thought of orange trees and courtyards where sailors wrote letters they would never post. You called me because I respect devils, he said. I called you, Eileen said softer, because the island isn't just not on charts. It's not on satellite. Ships don't see it. Planes go through it. But someone keeps marking it. And the man with my aunt's soup on his bib says he's supposed to deliver something to the navigators at the eye. Sarnai's posture changed a hair. The navigators? Eileen nodded. A hidden order with a better boat than anyone. They draw paths that don't exist for people who can afford to pretend they do. Elias rolled the map to the centerline where that wrong island wore its slim coat of ink. The red sigil marked a bay, the hooked crescents and the eye prick in a tiny line below, like a boat beneath a star. He ran through dates in his head, testable ones. Lisbon's earthquake, 1755, the great drafts walking up Baixa into fire. The map showed Baixa before Pombal bullied it into a grid. The sandbank outside the mouth had a different shape that matched sketches he had seen in a chapel where a brother forges dates for fun. "You're sure it isn't some art student's cruelty?" Sarnai said. Eileen shrugged and held up her arm. "If it is, it's a persuasive one." "Who's the man?" Elias asked. "The one without your arm." "Joachim," Eileen said. "He works the hills above the old Barro Alto carrying packages up and favors down. He has a way of being liked by bad people. One of them paid him to get this brand lasered off last year and replace it with something more fashionable. The laser failed. The brand came back in 2 days. He took a picture. The man who'd sent him the order showed up with a bottle and a threat and a smile and said he'd done good, and here was a second job: bring a tube to a boat and say nothing on the way." He spooked. "The tube found me through the old pipeline. It has been busy smelling like weather on my coffee table since Tuesday." "You are telling us," Sarnai said, looking around the little cafe, blue tiles, a framed portrait of a footballer with a saint's halo knocked in through smoke, the Fado singer now finding her notes again, the sea trying to own the windows, "because you would like us to go where?" Eileen leaned in until they could smell her clothes. She tapped the impossible island with a nail that had been cut short insensibly. "There," she said. "To see whether men can walk on water by walking around it." Fado stayed with Elias as the tram ticked them uphill, a rasped ache pulled taut and made to behave. Lisbon carried centuries like a woman who laughs at her own jewelry, a flourish, a shrug. Laundry flapped. Azulejos argued geometry. Every third doorway made a promise it had no intention of keeping. Above Baixa, they found Joachim in a room that had already learned most of its excuses. He sat by the window with his arm on a cushion, the brand facing the light like a good student. The skin around it was tender but righteous. His aunt, a woman whose hair had accepted its gray with offense, spooned caldo verde into a bowl and scowled at the world. Joachim's eyes were the kind that make policemen suspicious and grandmothers confess their sins to prove they still have teeth. "You are the historian," he said to Elias with a tone that sounded like Undertaker. "And the girl with the rope." "I am uncomfortable being categorized so efficiently," Sarnai said. Joachim grinned. "Good. Then you will live." He told them about a boyhood spent on roofs and an adolescence spent inside a courier's run, copying men's accents for sport, learning which alleys liked knives and which liked kisses. He told them about a man with rings and a belt made from leather that had never been alive, who paid on time and asked for nothing but ignorance. He told them about the brand. "I got it when I was 15, he said, "because my friends went to Alcantara and got dragons and I am coward, so I said no needle, I am a Muslim, my mother will murder me." He touched the brand gently, and the man said, "This is not a tattoo. This is a truth. It will teach you not to drown in small water." He held a coin in his left hand and pressed it to my arm. The coin was warm and my skin was tired. When he lifted, the mark was there and my breath was different. For 2 days I had dreams that smelled like the sea shouting. Then nothing. For 20 years. Then men started looking at me as if my arm owed them an explanation. "The navigators," Elias said. "They are a story men who like boats tell," Joachim said. "A way to make money smell like math. Eileen says they are real because everything is for 10 minutes. "Do you want to go where this mark says to go?" Sarnai asked. Joachim's mouth tried to be sardonic and failed. "I want to untie something," he said simply. "I am tired of my arm choosing my days." They went to the museum by the river because museums are churches with better lighting. In a case with a label that wanted to say more than it was allowed, a 16th century portolan stared at them with the slyness of men who made a living pretending the world had edges. The Azores sat on the page like dice thrown just so. In the blank west, a smudge, the drawn-as-joke island sailors insert to see who is copying them. But this one smudge had a shape, slim, wrong, akin to the island on their impossible map. "Phantom Islands," Elias said. "Sandy, Bermeja, High Brazil." The sea was an optimist for a millennium. "The sea was honest," Sarnai said. "It is men who refuse correction." A docent with a badge that had outlived 3 administrations drifted nearby like a helpful ghost. "We call that one a Ilha do Diabo in the old inventories," she offered. "But it's a joke. We say sailors drew it to make the king send ships to stones. The archivist who trained me said once a ship did find something there. But when it came back, the crew spoke to no one and gave all their pay to the church." "Which church?" Elias asked. The docent smiled thin without guilt. "The one nearest the fools. The saints like to be paid in the local currency. They watched gulls invent numbers over the water and made a plan that involved a boat because all good mistakes do. Eileen claimed she knew a man with a hull that never learned modesty. Joachim said he could stand on a deck without turning green. Sarnai refused to let a vessel be hired without seeing where it leaked. Elias let them be competent while he went to a chapel where maps go when they die. There, in a drawer that had chosen dishonesty as a virtue, he found a fragment of vellum with the same wrong island sketched, half erased, and a sigil inked on the bay. The clerk who fetched it wanted to feel important. Elias obliged him by asking questions about disbursements a century older than anyone needed. He left a donation that would pay for coffee and light bulbs and a janitor's sigh. On a hunch he photocopied the compass rose and took the copy out into sunlight. On paper in light the compass did a thing. Not a trick of ink. The arrows that had hooked each point when seen under the glass in the chapel unhooked themselves when the sun warmed them. The hooks aimed inward. The petals were not petals. They were roads. He knew then, in the rib-deep way men know when a story is about to climb into their lap and need feeding, that Lisbon was a chapter, not a book. The book was somewhere else. And the navigators, if they were not a joke, were writing in a language the compass understood. The boat Eileen loved had been built by someone who enjoyed cutting wood into truth. Her name was Bismillah in flaking blue on the stern and Nossa Senhora de Boa Morte under it in a hand that wanted to apologize to God for being a romantic. Her owner, Lazaro, had a mustache that would have been illegal in 3 countries and a collection of ropes so neatly coiled they made Sarnai suspicious. She eats weather, Lazaro promised, patting a scar that ran down her port side like a repentance. The Azores is a gentler fist this month. We stare at nothing for 3 days, we come home and you tell me it was a pilgrimage. If you find your island I will stop drinking for 1 week and make a vow to my grandmother's bones. I dislike vows, Sarnai said. Then don't make one, Lazaro said cheerful. You can be the knife. They went at dawn because even sane choices pretend to love sunsets. Lisbon shrugged them off its shoulder like a woman shedding a shawl. The river grew shoulders. The Atlantic waited with the faux passivity of an old fighter who is bored until he's not. Elias stood by the rail and let the city scent fade, the fried sardines and diesel and secrets, and let another scent replace it, tar, salt, time. Sarnai coiled line with Lazaro and passed him tools without names because their shapes had told her enough. Eileen perched on the cabin roof and read weather off a sky that considered being polite. Joachim leaned against the combing and admired the portion of courage that is leaving even when you can stay. Tell me about the navigators, Elias asked Eileen when the cliffs became an argument behind them. They're older than the orders that filed paperwork, she said. They don't wear robes because robes get caught in teeth. The story says a Moorish astronomer taught a Templar how to hear stars. The Templar died in a sea he did not own and the astronomer died in a house he could not afford, but their students stole what wasn't nailed down and made an order out of it, the navigators. They map paths that go where a compass won't. They bring men from one world to another with fewer explanations than the law prefers. In every century someone says they are dead. In every century a man with a brand on his arm delivers a tube to a boat at midnight. And the sigil? Eileen rolled her sleeve as if checking a translation. Some say it's an eye. Some say 2 crescents are 2 shores and the line is a boat and the dot is the cost. Some say it's a coin, and the hole is where you tie your conscience to a string so you don't lose it. Who branded you? Sarnai asked Joachim, not unkind. A man with a voice like an oar, he said. He looked at me the way uncles look at boys and said this will hurt and be useful. Then he handed me an orange and told me to eat it, and I bled a little and felt hungry for 3 days. Useful, Elias said. Men who do not have to prove their power always choose useful. On the 2nd day the ocean decided to show its height. The swell rolled under them like the ribs of a sleeping giant. Lazaro sang to it in Portuguese and then in a language no one else recognized and then in silence. The sky darkened in a petulant belt across the horizon and then remembered it had better things to do. At night, stars. Fat as gossip, sly as thieves. Sarnai lay on the deck and let them write on her eyes. Eileen told stories about smugglers she loved. Joachim smoked in a way that made you feel you were being invited to a small murder. Elias slept badly because age had decided to make a hobby of him and dreams insisted on bringing him maps without legends. On the morning of the 3rd day the sea flattened like a sheet being changed. A wind came up from where winds don't usually volunteer. The temperature bit their ears. Lazaro squinted at a nothing point on the horizon and stopped whistling because the tune he was whistling remembered it had been a prayer in a previous life. There, Eileen said and pointed where there was not yet anything to point to. The island arrived the way a wound does when you take your eyes off it for a second. One moment, horizon. The next, a narrow shape that would have been a knife if granite knew how to pick a fight with water. A shoulder of cliff sat green-black in the sun, tufted at the top with pines that had no business there. A cloud held a hat over its crown like a polite thug. The water changed its grammar around the island, streams too neat, foamy sentences cut short. The instrument shrugged. The GPS forgot their names and labeled the chart with an error code the screen didn't know how to handle. The compass twitched once like a horse that had heard a snake and then learned modesty. Lazaro spat and crossed himself and then patted the rail to comfort her jealousy. "Do we land?" Sarnai asked. "We arrived," Eileen said. "We must pretend we meant to." They found a notch that might have been a harbor if you closed one eye and lied. The swell tried to seduce them into admitting they were made of bones. They pushed past its compliments, and the keel kissed stones that had expected deference. Lazaro swore with the precision of a man who charges extra for swearing. Elias jumped early because old men like to pretend they still can, and got his boots full of the Atlantic's opinion. Sarnai took the painter up a steep like a goat making rent. Joaquim stood on a rock and laughed like someone who had postponed drowning. The notch gave onto a little beach of black sand and what looked like glass broken so politely it refused to cut. The air had a taste of something volcanic and something old pine and something that made Elias think of ink that had never seen paper. Above the beach, a path, not obvious, made of decisions more than stones. They took it because all stories require stairs. They climbed into a green that was not a color Elias believed in for the mid-Atlantic. Pines thick, ferns queerly outsized. A bird he could not name laughed at them and then apologized and laughed again. The path kinked around a basalt tooth and delivered them to a space that had learned to be court and cloister and convent and tavern. Buildings the size of patience leaned together around a square whose floor had been laid in basalt and quartz in a pattern that made Sarnai's head want to step differently. On a bench sat an old woman with a brand on her arm. On a step sat a boy with the same brand. On a lintel above a door a sigil had been carved, not fresh, not ancient, precisely maintained. The twin crescents, the eye, the little boat under the dot. "Welcome," said a man with a beard that had lost a debate with Salt years ago and was better for the loss. His forearm bore the brand. He wore a jacket that could have been work or ceremony. His Portuguese had islands in it. "You have found a place that refuses to be found. Congratulations. Please submit the object you intend to lie about." Eileen grinned and did not move the case an inch. "We brought questions. We thought you might have chairs." "We have chairs and we have questions," the man said. "We pay in food. I am called Duarte in this language and something less convenient in another. You may be called your own names." Elias said his and felt the square breathe. Sarnai's name made the ferns in the corners rearrange themselves, which was unacceptable and therefore true. Joaquim said his name like a confession. Eileen bowed without bending. "Navigator," Elias said. Duarte tipped his head. "A word put on us by men who don't like when their maps hiss. Come." They sat at a table under a roof made of patience and wood. Men and women came and went with the burn on their arms like a minor dignity. A pot of fish stew arrived that made Elias want to apologize to all the meals he had called good before. A black bread cut itself beautifully and was eaten with impunity. Sarnai drank water that tasted like it had learned geology. Eileen ate like a fox. Joaquim like a boy who has stood in a doorway unsure whether to enter a room and now has decided. "The map," Duarte said when their mouths had learned to belong to the room. "Show me what you did to find us." Elias unrolled the skin and watched the air lean. Duarte's face learned alertness without sharpening. The brand on his arm flushed once and went back to whatever ritual it performed when strangers misbehaved. He pointed to the compass rose. "Ah," he said. "A bad idea executed well." "You made this?" Sarnai asked. Duarte shook his head. "We maintain it. We don't make things we can't unmake. That is our one rule and we break it less than priests break theirs." "Who made it?" Elias asked. "The devil," said the old woman from the bench, walking closer with the economy of a life well spent. Her scar was old, the skin over it had learned peace. Which is to say, a person who wanted to own what he loved. "We call him O Cartografo," Duarte said. He drew coasts that didn't exist yet because his heart had grown allergic to permission. He discovered that the world is wider than maps and then wished to fix both. He was brilliant and dangerous and lonely, which is to say he was like every great saint and most evil kings. He left us work. We do not honor him, but we honor our work. "And the island?" Eileen asked. "How do you make a place the world forgets to count?" Duarte smiled at her the way a teacher smiles at a student who steals answers on behalf of the weak. "We do not make. We register. There are places the world inhales, little holes in the weave where breath stays. A mountain that never should have stood. A valley that remembers an old river. A coast that steps out of line in a storm and refuses to apologize for a century. We learn the rhythm that keeps such places private. We teach it to our bones. We measure the cost of bringing people here. We very rarely choose to pay it. You brought us, Sarnai said. You brought yourselves, Duarte corrected. You followed a brand that does not obey its owners. That is a kind of permission we do not grant lightly. Why brand people at all? Elias asked. Why not keep your chairs and stew in music without recruiting skin? Duarte considered him as if he were both naive and precious. Because you forget, he said. And because there must be a price to carry a path. The brand teaches the body a pattern. It is not a mark of ownership. It is a map. You can throw away a map. A pattern is a stubborn grace. Joaquim lifted his forearm like a student. Mine brings men with knives. Forgive us, the old woman said and meant it. We try to pick children who will not be bitten. We fail. A bell sounded, not metal, not wood. Air forgot to behave for a breath, then remembered itself. Duarte stood. The sea is changing, he said. Come see. They climbed to a platform carved onto the island's spine. The Atlantic lay around them like a rumor that had finally decided to be true. A line to the west darkened, then brightened, the kind of trick eyes play after too much sun, and then the water there settled wrong. A swell came in from under the wrong wind. The island shuddered like a cat that has been surprised. Storm, Lazaro said, knowing a thing that wasn't that. Not storm, Duarte said. A path opening. Elias felt it in his jaw first, the way rooms with right angles sigh. The compass rose on the map at his hip, warmed against the fabric of his jacket, though there was no heat in the wind worth mentioning. The red sigils on the page were no longer content to be drawings. They had become invitations. Duarte pointed to the western line. There, he said. You can walk on that for 6 minutes and forget you are human. Then you will remember, and the remembering will break you in kind ways. Eileen's fingers trembled on the case. And the devil's cartographer, she asked softly. Where is he buried? Duarte smiled without his teeth. In the only place he could abide, a room with no doors on a coast that cannot decide to be real. He took an oath to stop drawing after he realized his lines strangled people. He kept it for longer than any of us deserve. Then he broke it when a woman he loved asked him to save a city that wanted to be saved by killing another. He drew one last map and burned it and himself with it. We tell this to remind ourselves that maps are weapons dressed as promises. You sound like you might have forgiven him, Elias said. Duarte shrugged. We forgive men who love the world even when they insist on being cruel about it. Else there would be no one left to eat with. The bell sounded again. The air lost a stitch. A wind came through that learned their names and then forgot them as courtesy. Down by the harbor, Bismillah strained at her ties. Lazaro muttered to her as to a horse. We came because the map shows a coast that hasn't formed yet, Elias said. What is that to you? Duarte's eyes had been kind, now they were accurate. Destiny mapped in advance, he said. Men who have learned the trick inside any prophecy. Teach enough people it and the prophecy becomes an instruction. The coast you see is a coast that will be if someone keeps walking the same direction for the next 15 years and refuses every mercy of correction. We do not believe in future, doctor. We believe in tendencies. And this tendency? Sarnai asked. The sea will own more of Lisbon, Duarte said. Unless you ask it not to. Not with prayers. With choices. Pipes. Policy. Math. Then why market? Eileen demanded. Why brand boys with maps of people's laziness? So, they can walk to the right rooms and say no, the old woman said simply. So they can confess to men who think history has decided and explain to them how deciding happens. Joaquim stared west where the water drew a line under the sky with a stylus fate had never used in public. I want to redraw my arm, he said. You can't, Duarte said, not unkind. But you can teach it to hold a softer pen. They gave Elias a room that smelled of cedar and limes and battles the house had won. At night, the wind told the island jokes. He dreamed he was a younger man walking in a city that had not yet learned what it was for. In the morning, he woke with a feeling he recognized. The sense of having been given a chore by someone you trusted against your better judgment. Sarnai went down to the little cove and swam in water that had been a word and then a silence and now was a word again. Eileen traded gossip with the navigators and stole half their jokes, altering them in small ways so she could sell them back to their children. Joaquim sat with an old navigator who had palms like maps and learned to hold his arm over a bowl of steam with salt in it. The scar flushed and sighed and then sat calmer on his skin. Duarte asked Lazaro how often his hull whispered back to him and didn't laugh when Lazaro answered too often. Elias followed the brand and the compass and the part of himself that had always wanted a god to sit in a chair and be growing old quietly nearby. He found a room carved into the island's shoulder, open to the north, The wall inside hung with charts not of the seas but of the pauses in the sea, places where the current forgets itself, eddies that have the courtesy to last for a generation. Above the charts hung a single, stubborn book. Its skin was the same cloud gray as the map, its edges smelled of burnt citrus and storms. On its cover the sigil, Crescent's eye line. He reached and did not touch. "You may," Duarte said from the doorway. "It will tell you nothing if you do not ask it to do more than be a book." "I ask," Elias said. "It is a register," Duarte said. "The devil's cartographer's only honest object. He wrote where he had drawn. We maintain it because lies prefer to be alone." Elias opened the book with the care of a man who has lost a child and is being given someone else's to hold. The pages were a ledger without numbers, names that were not names, coordinates that were whispers, dates that had learned humility. Next to Lisbon, a line that ran across 50 years and then doubled back on itself. Above the Azores, a circle that wasn't one. In the margins of both, a red sigil stamped and then scratched lightly. "What does the scratch mean?" Elias asked. "It means we intend to argue with that destiny," Duarte said. "Who are you?" Elias asked softly. "We are a choir that refuses to sing when told," Duarte said. "We are men and women who can't bear to let maps boss futures. We are people with brands and jokes and bread. We are a tax on hubris. We are a mercy you're free to decline." "And the navigators," Elias said. "You, if I may be disrespectful, do not navigate." "We navigate the insistence of lines," Duarte said mildly, "like all good priests." "Do you want this?" Elias asked. He pointed at the map Eileen had delivered, at the compass that warmed when light tried to own it. "Do you want to keep it? Own it?" Duarte shook his head. "We want you to carry it to the men who will decide which pipes to lay and which words to teach the children. Tell them that the coast they fear is possible, not inevitable. Give them a sacrament of caution." "And the brand?" Joachim asked from behind them. He had come without sound. The brand on his arm was less angry. "Will it stop being a summons?" "No," Duarte said. "But it will become a choice." Eileen arrived with a laugh she had borrowed. "The island eaters say a fog will write its name on the water at noon," she said. "We should go or stay on purpose." "Go," Sarnai said from the stair. "Always leave before rooms forget you can." Duarte walked them down to the cove. The old woman kissed Joachim's brand and told it to behave. Lazaro cast off with the reluctance he saves for rooms he will miss. The water tried one last trick, pushing them toward a rock that had been shy earlier, and then the island and the path and the wrong wind heard a different audience calling and let them go. The sea taught Bismillah humility for 3 hours and then decided she'd had enough. The sky warmed its voice. The instruments remembered. The GPS stopped sulking. Lisbon grew at the rim of the world like a city climbing onto a stool to look over a hedge. They came in on a tide that liked them. On the quay, Eileen hugged Elias with her joints and Sarnai with her breath and Joachim with her smile and Lazaro with money that smelled of a priest's attempt at redemption. She tucked the tube under her arm with the same possessive apology she uses for knives. "I'm going to sell nothing," she said. "It will pay poorly and make me happy." Joachim looked at his brand and then at the water. "I will see a man in an office about a pipe," he said and did not smile. "I will say words like variance and tendencies. You will think I am an idiot. You will be right. I will tell him the island stew is better than his future. Then perhaps he will ask for more. Then perhaps." "Then," Sarnai said. She clapped his shoulder with a sister's threat. "Keep your aunt watching." Elias carried the map to a man he knew who signs the permission slips for other men. He did not show him everything. He showed him enough to make choices necessary and to make the wrong choice look lazy. The man looked at the wrong island on a page that should not have existed and did not cross himself because he knew better. He called a woman who moved money politely but quickly. She called 3 people who had forgotten how to say after elections. The pipes began to be considered by men who used to think futures were a fence and learned otherwise. At night, Elias stood where the Tagus learns the Atlantic and let wind put his hair in order. Sarnai joined him with pastry because Lisbon understands morality. He thought of Duarte and the old woman and a boy learning to boil his brand in salt. He thought of destiny as an arrogant map folded small. He thought of the room with jars that sing and the room with blood that counts. He thought, the world keeps letting us redraw it. Must be bored. Or kind. Or both. "I wanted to break the compass," Sarnai said around crumbs. "You always want to break the oar," Elias said. "Because oars think themselves soldiers," she said. "And maps think themselves verdicts," he said. A gull scissored the sky with an opinion. The river breathed. Behind them, Alfama began to rehearse a sadness with new jokes. A boat moved upriver with lights that made it look like a saint. Elias thought of the brand, the hooked crescents, the little boat, the eye prick, and understood it for the first time: 2 shores, an obligation, and the cost. He pressed his thumb to the page in his pocket where the compass rose, warmed only when he stood where choices mattered. He felt in his bones the island again, there not there, and the order mantling it like a patient umbrella. "Do you believe in fate?" Sarnai asked. "I believe in maps," he said, "and in pencils with erasers." She smiled in a way that made him remember the Gobi and a door in the Nile's throat and a room under Rome. "Good," she said, "because a man in Ponta Delgada just wrote me about a bell that rings before storms that never arrive. He thinks a lighthouse is singing the wrong song." "We should rest," he said. "We will," she promised. "On the boat." They walked the quay with their steps, speaking a language cities understand. Here, alive, moving on. Over the black water a thin wind drew a line and then laughed at itself. Somewhere a choir refused to sing. Somewhere a map waited for a better hand. And somewhere, just off a page that did not admit it belonged to any nation, an island relit its lamps and put stew on, because strangers had left and would need feeding again soon. Lisbon rolled its shoulders and kept loving the river. The future arrived on light feet, cautious, persuadable. And under Elias's palm, the devil's compass cooled as if content, just for tonight, to let other hands draw the coast.